Mark Hackett, Forum for Alternative Belfast. We're an urban think tank, and as our chairperson, Ken Sterry, often says, we're trying to do urban design with social purpose. So I wanted to talk about docks, debate and desire, just to coin some words that rhymed. Helsinki, a place that I've known quite well, and one of the places that was my utopia when I was 25. One of my favorite architects was there, and I always had this idea that I would live in Finland at some point, and somehow I got stuck back here at age 30. But things aren't perfect in Helsinki, but this is their equivalent to our Lagan side. This is their former docks on the west side of the city, which is currently being built out. And I think the process is probably much better than the buildings, I have to say. The process is that Helsinki Council probably owns around 90% of the land in Helsinki, and they are constantly buying land. They really see land ownership as the key to development. So they take the land. The council employs something like 70 architects and 270 planners. Most of them are proactive planners and not reactive planners. So they're actually coming up with the designs for these parcels of land, and they run competitions for them, and then they disperse them into the private sector or different sectors, cooperative structures or whatever, to actually build the buildings. So it is private sector development, but it's controlled by a public plan, and a plan born out of a democratic process, of course. And in this example here, they've already started, they were building this through the recession, because the Finnish market, it also means that the land prices aren't going up and down like a yo-yo. So when we lost something like a factor of 10, so the Scirocco site was apparently valued at about 60 million, is now worth 6, so it's about a tenth of what it was speculated up at the top of the market. And that's generally across Northern Ireland. Land has been over-speculated by a factor of 10. That didn't happen in Finland at that time. The market didn't crash, and they were able to kind of build this out through the recession. One of the first things that they did, let me see, is this the little, yeah. One of the key things in this development was to keep some of the old buildings. So some of the old 50s and 30s buildings from the docks era, the big ships were still stopping, but they were transforming old buildings, industrial buildings. So unlike our Titanic quarter, which knocked almost all the buildings down before they started, they kept even fairly unremarkable 50s buildings, They also planned a large park through the middle. They planned a tramway through the main avenue. And the other thing is, when they put it out to the private sector, they sort of say, okay, we want you to build that plot, that high. There's the rough configuration. You come back with a design, and we want you to stick a nursery school in there, or the school goes here. So the private market was also being encouraged and incentivized by the public services being proactively put in from the start. That gave them the confidence to go ahead. So that's exactly the opposite system to what we do. We expect the private market to solve all the problems, and then we build housing. Say, for instance, in the centre, we've built 15 years of housing. We've never built a school to provide for those people. And then, we come along 10 years after, people go, oh God, we really need a school in this area. We can't be travelling anymore. So then we build a school after the fact. So we end up doing everything back to front. And we talked about that earlier, of course. This is the other harbour at the other side of the city, one of the most beautiful cityscapes in the world. The grid set out after St. Petersburg. I think it was Engel, a German architect and planner, laid out the Helsinki grid and built the cathedral on a rock. So the cathedral actually sits high above the grid. This is two blocks back from the waterfront. So beautiful kind of waterfront, neoclassical waterfront, and a very ordered grid in Helsinki. A sort of great composition. And it is a bit ragged at the minute because the ferries have been coming in here for decades, and it's been taken over a little bit by car parking, lorries. It's not very easy to walk to those ferries. This is the good aspect here of the space. The Orthodox Church, the cathedral behind here, and the main esplanade, which is a green space in the city, cuts right into the grid. So 2 or 3 years ago, there was a competition to do a master plan for this area. They didn't really adopt any. They didn't think any of the projects were good enough, but they awarded 5 prizes. So there is no agreed plan for this area. I think it's really stymied largely because of the big terminals can't really be moved at the minute. And then more recently, why I show that is that 2 years ago as well, Helsinki Council rejected a bid for the Guggenheim to be housed on this site. So the Guggenheim were coming and saying, like Bilbao, everybody knows the Guggenheim Bilbao, that Bilbao actually built the building, gave the site, and said to Guggenheim, come. And that Bilbao effect, as they called it, has been used ever since by everybody to sort of say, oh yeah, we need to build some fancy building and everything will be all right. It kind of worked in Bilbao, debatable whether it really did work. Something like 40 to 60 arts groups were put out of business in Bilbao because of that building. But in regeneration terms, it was seen as the Bilbao factor. What Helsinki said they didn't want was they didn't want that. The council had the bravery to reject her proposal because it didn't stack up. And then this year, 2 years later, so that was the Guggenheim Helsinki design competition, actually was going again this year on a new site on the other side and a new deal for the city. So they drove a harder deal with that institution. But that is interesting, caused quite a bit of debate. So it's one of the biggest architectural competitions ever, 1,700 entries. I know about it because, and I must say, you know, I had issues about entering the competition, but I entered it for spurious reasons to take a career break, and also because the hand-in date was my birthday. So I thought, well, I'll go to Helsinki for my birthday and hand over the entry. Those are 2 designs of the 1,700 entries is the biggest architectural competition. I have to say it's the biggest exposition of crap architecture I've ever seen. I really couldn't get over how, I mean, I quite like that entry, but I don't know who did it. But there's a lot of crap. In fact, the vast majority of it is that. So it's kind of quite shocking for me as an architect to see how many really poorly conceived and, you know, uncontextual. Even though Helsinki said we don't want another iconic building in that sense, so many architects have just done big blobby things that don't relate to the space. So I wonder how that's going to be judged very soon. But what I realized on the hand-in is basically on the hand-in I didn't realize how much controversy there still was in this. So it turns out that the Green Party in Helsinki, for instance, were marginally pro giving the site over this time, this process. And that was partly because they were saying, well, we will join the coalition of other parties who are for giving this site and think, well, okay, Guggenheim for Helsinki will be more Nordic, it won't be a kind of glitzy building, it'll be more ingrained into the local infrastructure of arts movements and so on. There was all these caveats put on it, but mainly because they said we don't want a road built on the edge of the city. So it's kind of interesting that whatever happens with this building, whether it's good or bad, it might have actually got the go-ahead because a road was stopped somewhere else, which I think would start to make the building good. So that made me feel better when I heard that story. But the interesting thing was that the council, who was funding the land for this project and was one of the backers, not the only backer, but one of the backers, also funded this process, the next Helsinki. The day the competition finished, a new competition launched. And this guy here is Sorkin, an architect who wrote 20 Minutes in New York, I think. It's about his walk through New York. So he's a kind of architect who's interested in kind of a social critique in New York and a kind of interesting judging panel of people from around the world to say, actually, we want a different view for Helsinki. And they say, the city is the greatest collective work of art ever conceived, and Helsinki is one of the most exquisite examples, I suppose he means. So I think that's Michael Sorkin's statement. You know, the city is the greatest collective work of art. What he means is that's one of the things we've certainly lost as architects. The ability to, the ability to come together and make a collective work of art, which is a city. But the council funded the objection group, and they're running an alternative competition. But I find that quite interesting. And I find it quite mature of a council to fund one project and also fund the opposition. Moving on to Malmo. I mean, these are again, Malmo has spent about 15 years in one government. It has more left-leaning. I think we all know it from, some of us might know it from a kind of Scandi drama. And, you know, we shouldn't love cars, but I do love that one. Something about the colour of it. So Malmo, of course, exists opposite Copenhagen. Has really been transformed by the bridge. But the way that Malmo has developed over the last 15 years, There's the Twisted Tower. I can't remember, is that Calatrava? They built this development here. I think there was a slide earlier on of this. This is a kind of yuppie development. But one of the things that happens here is there's a boardwalk and there's a beach. And one of the key things about the boardwalk and the beach, there's the boardwalk, is the shops at the ground floor are affordable shops. And actually, one of the first things they did was they built a high-speed tram system from the poorest area of the city on that side to the beach. So what a resident of Malmo told me recently was that, in summer, everybody goes to that beach. There's no social segregation. So even though the building of the seafront development is a kind of yuppie, more affluent thing, the beach is a shared space socially. And it's because of that transport system, low cost and effective transport system, that makes that work. So I think that's what Scandinavia is doing. And I think the only critique I'd add to that is the standard of architecture in Helsinki is not up to the standard of planning, is what I've observed. So the built results are often not as good as the system. Okay, thank you.